Guys, we're getting into our seventh video on a series of so you want to build your own gaming PC, or at this point, whatever I'm naming it. But we're getting into motherboards, which may seem backwards. I was debating whether to do processors first or motherboards, but I've decided to go with motherboards because I feel like that's kind of an important first step. I mean, you could argue a lot of components like CPU is probably the most important, but you got to have some place to put that. And so first, I wanted to point out how far things have come with motherboards. The first machine I built was back, I think, in the early 2000s, and it was a much different world then. Like, we are so much luckier today than we used to be. And so, for example, I'm gonna have a couple of images running through this video. I'm trying not to overdo it with images, but if you were to build a gaming rig back in the day, there used to be arguments over a lot of different components. It wasn't just board and memory at the time, or processor. There were other debates about what was the best audio card to get. Should you get wireless? And there was a point where wireless wasn't available. I remember when I first built my machine, it was still too expensive to get wireless, but it was, if you could, should you get wireless? It was a different world for wireless. This is a more modern picture of a wireless card. And at that time, boards were not coming with audio or good audio. It was a different world. You had to buy a separate audio card. The first machine I built that I didn't pay for, which was just something I threw together, you had to have an audio card in there. Like, you didn't have to, but if you wanted to hear, you had to. A lot of people that are probably older than I am or my age will remember the days of Sound Blaster, and where you really wanted to make sure you had the right thing. Crystal Audio was also a brand at the time. I'm showing my age here, but Bluetooth was not a thing. And to point out on the images over on the side, if I'm pointing the wrong way, the images up here, that bottom card could be Bluetooth as well. In the beginning, it was Wi-Fi only, though, and that was generally how you would fix your wireless on your machines. Now, I've always used a wired connect for my desktops, unless I have some weird reason to use wireless. I use wired all the time because I want a good stable connect, and wireless can be really iffy sometimes. Even if your internet's not having a problem, you can have game performance issues when you're playing a live service game because the wireless isn't working. But anyway, not to get off a tangent, later on, those smaller cards, I went the wrong way, sorry, the camera's reversed. These smaller cards used to be just wireless, and then as my last machine, my old Potato, it did have Bluetooth connectivity and it had Wi-Fi because I installed an upgraded card up there like that allowed that. Prior to that, I was using a dongle, which is just above that card, and those were USB devices that let you use newer versions of Bluetooth, or if you didn't, or for a lot of people, they would own a laptop, and that laptop did not have Bluetooth, and that's how you get that connectivity. Today, though, almost every board, actually, I would go, I'm going to say this statement. If I'm wrong, somebody show me the board. But at this point, on consumer grade motherboards for desktops, it would be almost unheard of not to get Bluetooth and wireless integrated in, and audio, and good audio at that. The rig I have now supports, I think, full 8.1 on audio is what it does, something to that degree. It can do everything, and the ports are programmable. Old ports were not programmable, so meaning the sound system I have here, the speakers I have by Logitech, those, not a paid endorsement, nobody's paying me for any of these. Logitech speakers I have can do 7.1, but there's only 3 audio ports on the back of this machine. I don't have to buy another card because all 3 of those ports can be used. Even though one is a microphone port, it's addressable to be like the subwoofer or something else. So I'm able to utilize all of that. And the microphone I have is USB. I'm not using an analog mic anymore. I'm not plugging in that way. So, but anyway, yeah, just to go over, like, things have changed. And I think it's important to note that because I think that a lot of people end up overspending on a motherboard, not realizing that should be like one of your cheaper components. Not cheap, but cheaper. The 2 most expensive, or let's put it this way, the 3 most expensive parts you should buy should be your processor, or let's get that order wrong, sorry. The GPU, the processor, and then your motherboard, I think, in that order. RAM is a bit different right now, I know, because where the market's at, and as of the filming of this video, RAM is still high up there, so RAM will probably be 3rd place, and then board should be your 4th place if we're looking at right now. But I don't think you should spend more than $150 on a board. When I built my machine, I think it was around $100. That's gone up now to $140. I just looked at prices for what I have. So speaking of that, we are going to be looking at a limited set of boards for this. And to reference to you, kind of what we're looking at is going to be two sizes. Now, here's a reference chart for you. You have standard ATX is what what I use. We're going to be looking at that size, and then mATX or micro ATX. Mainly for this build series. If you need to build a subcompact machine, mini ITX is where you're going to want to go, but you will find some issues with that, such as part compatibility and stuff. But if you're building a super small machine, we're talking you're looking for that build that is going to be in similar size to a Steam box, to a Steam machine. Mini ITX is going to probably be where it's at for you, but you're going to run into problems with finding expandability on those mATX boards and ports, severely limited on ports, because those boards only have so much in them and they're highly compact. So cooling can be an issue if you have that much stuff packed in together, especially with the GPU being that close. So that's why I recommend, if you're going to make something for your living room, go micro ATX. There are some great cases that are super tiny, that they're still going to be bigger than mATX, but they're still going to be small. And with micro ATX, you still have some expansion options. So those are the two sizes we're going to be going over throughout this series. So if I'm referencing boards, we're talking ATX or micro ATX, which is mATX. So some terminology for you there. For today's video, we're going to be going with, and I'm a little bit biased again, none of this is sponsored. Nobody's paying me anything. If someone wants to cut me a check, feel free to, but I doubt it's going to happen. We're not even getting ad revenue on these at this point, but we're going to be going with two boards. I'm going to click the images up here. The first one is going to be the did I click right? Yes, I did. The B550M AORUS Elite AX, which is what I have. It's version 2 of that, or 1.2, I think is what I've got. At the time, that cost me $100. This is a bigger board. I know the picture's not exceptionally clear. I'll have links in the description, so if you want to look there now, by the time this video is posted, they'll be there, obviously. You can go look this board up by the link and look at the specs and follow along. And then the other board, the B650M AORUS Elite AX, is the equivalent of that ATX board, but the same company. Both of these are by Gigabyte. I like Gigabyte as a company. I have used their products many times, and I'm biased at this point. You should research your own boards. Mainly, we're talking about form factors, not brand, but they're a brand that I trust and I've used. It's what I'm running right now and continue to run. There are a lot of other options out there. This one happened to be the most cost-effective for me at the time based on the feature set I was looking for. And there'll be a link for this in there as well. I will note there is an error on their site. It looks like they list the ATX board, the mATX board is not supporting the 9000 series processor, but then their spec sheet says it does. So that may be something, if you do decide to get their mATX board as a result of this, if you decide to get that, you may want to clarify with them. At the point of making this, I have not contacted them. I'm not putting that effort into it, as sad as that may be to hear, because this is a very basic general level video. So use that as a learning experience, that if you're not sure about a compatibility for a board, email the manufacturer and say, hey, I notice here it says it doesn't support this, but your spec sheet says it does. What's the deal? Does it or does it not? Even Amazon's page and Newegg's page show that the micro ATX version of this board supports the 9000 series processor, which to me is important because I'm running a 9000 series processor on my build. So hope that helps. But those are the two boards we're going to run. This is not to scale for image. It's probably not very accurate height-wise, but width-wise, it is a little bit shorter. So it's important to note that if you're looking for sizes, go to the manufacturer's website, but the board physically will be smaller because it has less on it. There's less stuff to it. So it's going to have a little bit more room. You are losing some ports. For example, between these two, there is one less PCI port on the mATX version, obviously because there's less to the board. Though I am confused why they kept multiple RAM slots and did just narrow it to 2. That I don't know. We'll talk about RAM in a minute and stuff. It has the same amount of SATA ports and stuff. For the most part, it's the exact same board, just scaled down. There are some differences, but I don't think anything that's going to matter to the common person. If I had a space issue and I was not going to build off the ATX board, I'm going to be building into an mATX, and that's just where it's going to be. I'm old school. I love large PC cases. It is one of my favorite things to have a machine, just a tower machine, not an extended machine, not a gigantic machine, but something there. So, and so that's going to be your main difference, is that on some micro ATX boards, you're losing ports. Sometimes that's RAM slots, and if that's the case, go for it. You should not be using all 4. I'll explain why in a little bit here. You may be getting less PCI slots, but really the only thing that matters is you have at least a PCI 5.0 for your GPU. That's what's important. So the other thing to point out is that in your build, a micro ATX board in most cases is going to be cheaper than a lot of the ATX equivalents because there's just less to that board. Now, the caveat as of making this video, because of where everything's at in the world right now, is that the prices are about the same. For example, the ATX version that I just showed you is 140 something on Amazon. The mATX version is 130. So you're not saving but 10 bucks. To me, if you're going to be building at this point and the cost isn't going to be different and you don't have space limitations and you're going to put your tower near your desk, on your desk, not on the floor, again, not on the floor, go for a larger size machine. You can fit more into it. Cooling becomes a lot easier. There's less obstacles there. If you're into the light show circus of a machine, if you will, a bigger case is going to showcase the lighting a lot better, whereas mATX is going to be a lot more compact. And to touch back on ITX, even though we're not getting into that, it is so small, it's not going to convey light that well. So if you were doing a micro machine, an ITX build, which is a small form factor, I would say not to buy anything that lights up because most cases are not going to have a lot of display on them. I have seen some beautiful cases that they're opened up, but to me it looks really bad when you've got this ginormous light up fan and then you've got all this stuff just crammed behind it. I think it looks awful. So anyway, that's kind of a tangent. So yeah, but moving on, the next portion of this we need to talk about, as I'm reading from notes here, is the well, let me loop back because I just read something here. Sorry, I filmed these in one take. It's just how I work. I don't have a whole crew here. It's just me. But is that if you do build into a micro ATX case, that's transferable to a bigger case. So if you decide you want to slowly transition to a bigger machine, you can take your micro ATX board and install that in a bigger case. It will fit in an ATX case. Most cases these days are going to be to a point where they fit all the way up to a certain size. You can even get cases that fit ITX all the way up to eATX, which is the extended ATX. There's cases like it. They cost a little more because obviously there's more to that case. In most situations, you're going to encounter full-size towers that will do mATX up to ATX because there's the plate that you actually attach the board to, the portion the backer, is drilled for a lot of those. Some are drilled for all, some are drilled for just a couple. So it's really up to you what you want to do. But all in all, you can always go up from micro ATX, but you can't really go down from ATX easily. Also note, just as a side thing, if you're wondering if you can just like change boards out mid operating system, you can. From a tech perspective, you can, but it's a lot more work. You have to do driver cleanup and there's a lot of, it's not worth it. If you plan on physically switching your board to a completely different board, even if it's by the same manufacturer, just reinstall Windows from scratch and do everything from scratch. You will save yourself a ton of headache. Just trust me, this comes from years of experience. While technically, yes, Windows will still run, you may have license key issues with Windows, activation issues. I think they allow you 3 different hardware swaps. So that's also important. If your board dies and you swap it with a replacement board, it's going to have a different serial, and Microsoft limits the amount of reactivations you can use on Windows. I think you can call them past that, but when I've had to do that in corporate environments, it's always a pain because it's always a lengthy phone call. It's always a lot of questions. It's always a lot of, is this machine stolen, stuff like that. I prefer not to go with that. Just reinstall Windows. Even though you will use up an activation, it's easier to use it up during a reinstall of Windows like you're doing an upgrade. And essentially you should think of changing your motherboard out for a new board as an upgrade if it's not the same exact model that you've warranty replaced. So hope that clears that up and it's clear as mud for you guys. But if not, let me know in the comments. I can do separate side videos answering questions if you guys need that, or I can do combination videos answering multiple questions if you guys would like that. So moving on now to CPU, if nothing else, this should be, when you start your virtual build, if you will, this should be where you start. You want to make sure that the board you're getting is going to support the processor you're eyeballing. And we're going to do, I know it seems backwards, and I just wasn't sure what order to do this in, and I didn't want to combine the videos, but we're going to be, the next video we're doing will be over processors, CPUs. So you may want to reference this one after seeing that one, or, just keep this one in mind, whichever, however you choose to do it. But you want to look at what you're going to use for a processor first. The RAM is going to kind of fall in line. A lot of other components are going to fall in line, right? The only other important thing to do is make sure that the GPU you're getting isn't going to be bottlenecked by the CPU, which that should not be a problem if you're doing a new build. Should not be an issue whatsoever. If you're working off of an older machine and you're upgrading your GPU, you can definitely see CPU bottleneck issues. If you underbuy your processor, that can be a problem as well. So make sure you're getting in good line there, but you also want to make sure that your board has good expandability for processors. As I talked about early on in the series, you may buy a processor that's $100, $150 cheaper because it's what you can afford, but you want that pathway to being able to upgrade in the future. So you may need to save $150, maybe 200, whatever it's going to be. Maybe there's a great deal on an 8-core processor right now, but you know you're going to want a 12-core processor later on or a little bit faster. You can cheap your machine down based off of the bare minimum you need to play games at res, and in this case we're talking 1080 with 144 FPS. You may find you're just fine buying right now at this date and time, buying a mid-range processor with 8 cores that's going to support your GPU just fine, and you can upgrade later on if it's getting sluggish. You're not rebuilding the whole machine. As long as your board supports the processors you're looking at doing, you can swap those processors out without having to reinstall Windows. You can upgrade those. So, you know, again, you may be spending $200 less right now on a processor. That may be an additional $200 you need freed up to get a GPU, a better GPU. And those are trade-offs you can make. Same with RAM. You can get a little bit slower RAM and then upgrade that later on. You have flexibility. I see far too many videos where it's like, you must buy 6400 MT, you must buy this processor, and you must have this GPU, when you actually do have quite a bit of flexibility. And if you want to spend less now, do so you can upgrade later on, because I will tell you that you will get comfortable with your system, and then once you upgrade a component, it will feel that much better. On the other hand, if you buy the max out now, as the machine ages and you find you're using more and more and more, you're not able to upgrade anymore. Whereas buying exactly what you need, or close to exactly what you need, with a little bit of headway, as you upgrade, it's going to feel each time like you're getting a brand new machine. So it will be really great to go from this generation of GPU and RAM or processor and then up to the next portion of that. Even if you're running a base level 9000 series AMD processor and you're just like, oh, this has been great, and then you go to the mid-range of that, and then other times you may just be good where you're at. I don't plan on upgrading my processor at this point, but I don't know what AMD is going to put out. But for right now, what I've got is great. It runs wonderfully. And on that, you know, we'll talk about this in CPUs, about the, people seem to think they need to have the X3D. I don't think that's the case. That's going to be a part of an opinion in the CPU video, but keep in mind that you can game perfectly fine without an X3D. I have specific reasons why I didn't. I don't just game, I do other tasks. That's a heavy portion of it. And again, in the CPU video I'll be going over that. So, and so moving on from that, we're going to talk about, PCI. Before I jump there, sorry, I'll probably show you if you're wondering. I keep forgetting things, sorry. This is generally what a CPU slot is going to look like. I think this one's an Intel one. The AMD ones on current gen look similar, where it's flush. It fits flush with the socket. Older ones, including AMD, Intel's been pinless for a while, which I like the pinless design. I prefer that. It's easier to install those. But AM, I think it was AM4 socket is still probably using the pins. So be sure you're getting the right processor for the socket type. Your processor socket is going to look like that. So if you're wondering what it looks like on the board, it's going to look like that. Just to give you kind of an ID portion if you've never really looked into a computer before. And that's what that's going to look like. And so again, you can look the boards up by the link I sent. They're also easy to find charts that ID the parts on a board for you. So, but moving on to PCI slots here. I know it's a smaller image, but the two black slots there are PCI slots. There's different generations of those. The top one, some boards outline theirs in that metal framing for support for stronger brackets. And on the back end of that, it's got that press in where you put your thumb to get the GPU out. That's where your graphics card's going to go. The other two slots are strictly extra for extra peripherals. So if you want to install an extra USB card, there's cards that will go in that smaller PCI, I think it's a 3.0 slot, but you can also use the cards that go in the smaller slots in the bigger ones. It will still work. So a lot of people don't realize that it will work, but generally you have to ask yourself what you're actually going to use out of all of this as far as expandability. If you don't plan on putting additional cards in, you may just want to cheap out on a board, an mATX board that doesn't need a lot of expansion. I like having those options. So the board I have, I think, has two of the longer PCI slots. It has one of the smaller ones, and then it has the slot for the graphics card. If I remember right, it's all in my case. I'm not looking at it right now. I could look at the site and see, but the point is, there's enough expansion for future use that I'm not worried. You can plug in a lot of things into these expansion ports. They make cards that let you install additional M.2 drives if you want. I wouldn't recommend that, as it's just really not needed with what's on the board, and we'll get to why in a little bit here. But it's just not. A lot of the expansion you're just not going to use until maybe in the future, or again, if your USB ports stop working, you can't afford to replace the board, it may be something to just get a PCI USB card. Or if a new revision of USB comes out, my old Dell was this way. It only supported up to USB 2.0. If I wanted to take advantage of 3.0, I had to put in an expansion card, which I did, and that worked fine, worked perfectly fine. So there are use cases for it, but it depends really on what you think you're going to use. Most of the ATX boards are going to come with a lot of PCI slots, a lot of expansion slots. That's kind of the advantage of getting it. It gives you future forward expandability. So it's really up to you what you're looking for doing. If you want to know, PCI stands for Peripheral Component Interconnect. I haven't used that term since saying it just now in like decades. Just everybody says it by the short form now. I don't know many people that know what that even means anymore. They just know that's where cards go. That's expansion ports for cards. That's what that is. By the way, these will be towards the bottom of the board. The PCI will always be towards the bottom, with the GPU slot being towards the center of the motherboard. The CPU slot will be just above. You can see the tail end of it up there in the corner, as I'm trying to point. You can see it up there in the corner. That's the bottom of the CPU socket. That's how close they are. So they'll be really, really close to each other, just so you know where things are at. Moving on, we're going to talk about RAM. So this is one of those things that has changed over time. Back in the day, you wanted to get as much RAM as you could. You wanted to shove, as much as you could into that board. And we don't do that today. It stresses the memory controller. You'll hear a lot of tech channels talk about this. You really only need to use 2 slots. You may get more capacity out of using all 4. Most boards top out at 256 gigs of RAM. You're probably never going to use that. I think it's one of those things with ATX boards, it's either a design thing or it's just cheaper for them to install all 4 slots. I don't know. I just know that pretty much every ATX board comes with 4 RAM slots, and then those go in, it goes ACBD is how the slots are usually labeled, and you want to make sure that you're putting RAM in the correct slots. So you should have one stick in A and one in B if you're just using 2, or the machine will have issues. It just will not run correctly because they're paired. They go in parallel. But only use 2. You can get a performance hit. I have not tested myself. I think for the general user, even if you maxed out your RAM, you're not going to notice much of that performance hit. I don't think many common users are going to be touching the performance levels that it's going to matter. But I will say that for the average user, 32 gigs is going to be more than enough for you. I have 32 gigs. I do video editing. I play games. I watch videos. I do rendering, all of that. And I have not got to a point where I've tapped out the 32 gigs RAM. I also run multiple web browsers with multiple tabs open. I have them open right now while I'm recording this, and it's not causing a performance hit. And I have a lot of background tasks running, and I'm not having any issues whatsoever. So if you are just building a gaming rig and your main use for your machine is going to be playing games, browsing the web, watching YouTube, maybe watching some movies on your machine, and maybe doing some photo editing, you're not going to touch any of that RAM for not enough to matter. And if you start having issues, you should probably see if you have a program that's got a memory leak, or if you're just not meeting a requirement someplace else for what you're doing. Maybe you have the wrong speed memory, something there. There's definitely some troubleshooting to be done, but I don't think the average user that's generally just gaming is going to have an issue with 32 gigs RAM. I do not foresee that being an issue. If you're at a position where maybe you've got a 8 gig graphics card, which there's argument about whether that's enough VRAM for games at this point or not. If you're having an issue with your graphics card being too low, you do not want to be in a position where you're trying to get your machine to use physical RAM to fill that gap. Physical RAM will be slower. Regardless of the speed that you have on that RAM, it is going to be loads slower than what the GPU can handle. So will it still work? Yeah, but you're going to take a performance hit big time on that. So yeah, just 2 points. Only use 2 RAM slots, and make sure you have the right kind and right type of RAM. We'll have another video coming up talking about RAM. I forget what order that's coming up in, but we will have a video talking about RAM before too long here. It will be in this series. Again, we're going over every component, so the important components, I should say anyway. So that's what you need to know. RAM slots, by the way, this is a turned socket on this board, or I believe these are above. Looks like these are above the socket there. The CPU socket. RAM will always be right by the CPU socket. In most cases on ATX boards, CPU socket's here, top of board is here, RAM is directly to the right. So that will be the case in most cases. With motherboards, it's going to be that way. So just so you know, that's that in position. Again, you can reference all this in pictures of a motherboard. Let's move on to storage now. So this is going to have two components to it. So first, you want to make sure at a minimum for the build, and when I talk about storage later on, we're going to lightly touch on some of what I'm going to cover in that video here, but make sure you have at least two M.2 slots. Commonly on every board, and on the other board that I talked about here, the Micro ATX, it has two M.2 slots as well. But commonly, one is going to be a Gen 5, which is the fastest you can do at this point on consumer grade stuff. And then one's going to be a Gen 4. For most users, it is not going to matter to you. The speed is going to be sufficient on either one of those for what you're doing. I would recommend you use the Gen 5 for your operating system. One is, let's say you get a faster Gen 5 M.2 later on, and you want to upgrade to that because you want that extra speed. You can clone one drive to the other. That's more advanced. I know some of you may not know what that means, but you can clone to a newer one, and then that way you're just automatically using that upgraded slot. But it should be your primary. Some boards, the Gen 5 slot is your primary for the operating system. You can set it otherwise, but it's the default primary slot. So that's the other reason to use that. And then your secondary M.2. So the breakdown that I've kind of harped on for storage is primary M.2 should be your operating system. If you can get a 512 gig cheaper, do that to save you some money, and do nothing but put your operating system on there and essential files. Don't do anything on that primary. Unless you've got crap you're downloading from the web to your desktop, you can change your directories where stuff saves, but it should be only handling the operating system, Windows updates, and other system files, as limited as possible. And then if it's not a cost issue, just get you a 1 terabyte. That leaves plenty ahead from your expansion. But I think a base install of Windows 11 is going to be under 256 gigs. So even at 512 gigs, you're going to have a lot of space. Just keep in mind when you're setting up your game installs that you set things up so that everything installs to the other drives. And that's where we're getting into other ports. Your secondary M.2 slot, what you should use that for, should be a gaming drive. That does not mean go buy an expensive gaming M.2. I was using Crucial, but they're not making cards. So thanks to everything happened in the world, a lot of components I liked are no longer available. But get a 1 terabyte M.2 as a secondary drive for games that need that faster access. Cyberpunk, Baldur's Gate 3, Helldivers can take advantage of that. You don't have to, but it does take advantage of that. For those games that are newer, the newer AAA titles, they're demanding fast read-write access. So that's where you're going to want to have those. In addition, if your game is, 50 gigs plus, you want a drive that can handle fast read-writes, generally writes, so you can get that game installed fast. You want those downloads to go quick. Otherwise, you're going to be kind of limited if you're using a traditional type drive. Again, you're going to run into an issue of capacity because games are getting so big. A terabyte is 1,000 gigabytes, and a gigabyte is 1,000 megabytes. So think about how many games you can install. If you have a game at 75 gigs, you've used almost, a tenth of that drive. My math might be off, but 100 of that drive, something. You're using a bit of that drive is my point. You're going to quickly fill that up. And I've seen games topping 120 gigs at this point now. So if you're not having a lot of games, install your fastest games there. You will find that as you get a PC game library built through Steam, GOG, and other places, you will start collecting games very quickly, and you have to ask whether you want as many installed as possible. That's where I'm at. I want as many installed as possible all the time. Or if you're okay with some of those falling by the wayside and just not being installed. I don't like to wait for a game I want to play to be installed. And then your third drive, and this is where it's important now that we're moving away from M.2, you want to make sure that you've got at least 2 SATA ports. This is a picture of 4. Most of the boards, including the Micro ATX board I pointed out in this video, have 4 of these. SATA, whatever you want to call it, I don't judge. It's serial ATA. This is the older standard for hard drives. Generally, this is going to be mechanical hard drives, though there are some older SSDs that use this if they're the enclosed type, like laptop size. But I would say use these for a mechanical hard drive. And the reason we're not saying SSDs is because SSDs are kind of price limited and production limited at about a terabyte. So it's going to be a waste of your time. Unless you want a 1 terabyte SSD for file storage, and you want that speed for file storage, for games, I would highly recommend you go for capacity. And for games that are not very big, you know, that size is going to be dependent on the game's manufacturer, because I have some games that are like 20, 30 gigs, but they're Xbox One era, or they're older games that are under that in their Xbox 360 era. My general rule of thumb is if the game would have ran fine on all the way up to the Xbox One, before the last couple years of the Xbox One's life, or the PS4's life, put it that way, it'll probably run fine on a mechanical hard drive, because that's what those consoles had. So the bulk of your library at this point in time, 90%, if you have a vast library, I should say, 90% of your games are going to be able to run perfectly fine off a mechanical hard drive. And the cost to get an 8 terabyte mechanical hard drive compared to a 1 terabyte, 2 terabyte SSD is going to be far, far cheaper. So, and they'll last a lot longer. Mechanical hard drives are slower, but they last a lot longer. They are like tanks. They will take a beating and keep going. And so the majority of your older games, anything that's Xbox One, with the exception of a handful of titles that are new and back, should all be installed onto your mechanical hard drive, your older hard drive, because that's what it was designed for. That's what it's used for. You do not need anything super fast. I will have a separate video over storage talking about what speed to drive to get, what kind of drive, those kind of things. And I will tear into that in that video, but this is just a brief summary of that. But ultimately, the short of it is you should have 3 different types of drives in your build. One should be a primary M.2 for your operating system. It doesn't have to be large. Secondary should be another M.2, 1 terabyte at a minimum for games, just for games that require high read-write access. And then you should have a third drive, which is a mechanical hard drive that runs off of an old SATA port. That's all you need. Obviously, if you decide you want to have multiple drives, you can do that on the mechanical drives. An ATX case will have plenty more storage to fit more drives, whereas a micro ATX may not have a lot of room to fit a lot of hard drives. But at a minimum, with 90% of micro ATX cases, you're going to be able to fit 2 M2s on the board and 1 mechanical hard drive somewhere tucked away in the case. Mine had a mounting bracket. I feel very lucky with that. I like that this mATX case had that. So I had a place to put that, and I was very happy with that. So, all right, and so that about finishes up everything on the motherboard, what you need to look for. I don't think I'm missing anything. Again, this video series is being made for the common person that's either never built a gaming rig before, or maybe you've got one and you're looking to upgrade and you're not sure what to do. Maybe you bought a pre-built and you're not sure what you're looking for. You can also use this kind of a guide of what you're getting when you buy a pre-build too. A lot of pre-builds are coming stuffed with high-end parts you're just not going to use, and those are getting sold out. So I don't think pre-build is always a good choice for the consumer at this point. If you could build your own, I highly recommend doing that. So check board reviews, see what people are saying. Having said that, reviews have been difficult lately for me on a lot of products, because I'm seeing that we tend to gravitate towards the negative, and I've seen a lot of people making decisions on what to buy based off of 5 negative reviews over hundreds of positive ones. So for gigabyte boards, I've used them. I don't do their GPUs anymore because their production slipped on that. And as far as I know, they're not doing GPUs anymore. I've had 3 of their GPUs in the past that all worked fine. I had one burn out, but that's because a fan died on it. And that's because I failed to dust my machine properly. So that was on me, not them. And that card still kicked good with a fan down. With one fan down, that card was still kicking. So I've got to give credit to that. But as far as motherboards go, I have enjoyed their boards. I've put their boards on other people's machines. I've worked on machines that have the gigabyte boards. I like them. They're not the only manufacturer. Many other manufacturers get them. Your main point should be price, and then reviews is what you should be looking at. And for me, this was the cheaper board. Again, I got mine for around $100 at the time. I built this machine, was it in February or February last? I think I built it February of last year. So, you know, I've had that there, and it's worked, and I like what they have. That's just my opinion. Do not go buy parts by manufacturer if you don't trust that manufacturer. That's your choice to make. And again, I'm not endorsed by any companies in these. I'm trying not to name too many, but I want to use references to parts I actually have where I can. But as long as you stay with the major brands, you should be fine, right? MSI, Gigabyte, AMD, stuff like that. If you're hearing some weird Chinese name you've never heard before, I'm going to advise you don't buy that. I don't care how cheap it is. You get what you pay for in a lot of cases, and brand name can matter to a degree. So be very careful with that. You know, look at a trend of things. If you have the money and you're watching the series because you're just having fun, feel free to make a build off of cheaper parts you found. There are a lot of videos out there showing what people build off third-party machines, third-party parts that have weird names. And they last for a little bit. Maybe they're not bad parts, but then the warranty becomes an issue. I know with Gigabyte stuff and a lot of their components I have, the warranties have always been good to me if I've needed to use them. I've never had to use them. You know, I've had warranties with Dell products I've used, and then they break and I find out I've had it for so long, it's way out of warranty and there's no extension on it. But I can go buy a third party, buy from a third party seller and get the same board. My Dell had that happen. The board pooped out on me. It was a bad power supply that killed it, to be fair. I'm not going to say the brand of that, but they paid me for a replacement board. And as part of that, I agreed not to say anything about brand in that particular case. So, because it wasn't, the warranty they had was not covering, because the power supply still worked. They were saying it was a board issue, and I proved it was not the board. And they were like, well, this time we're gonna give you the money to replace the part, which is the motherboard. But if it's anything else beyond that, you're on your own. I knew the processor was good. I knew the board just got fried. It was a bad power supply unit. That power supply unit was not right. So I think they were trying to avoid possibly bad press or something if it was found out that that power supply shipped and had an issue. But anyway, that's in the past. That's a few years ago now. But anyway, yeah, so short, very long here as I'm watching the runtime of what I'm recording. That's what you need to know for a motherboard. Again, if you have any questions or you think something's wrong, whatever, leave it in the comments. I'll be glad to address that. If there are multiple questions, as always, I will run a response video answering all of those in depth or as best I can. I don't mind doing those. I tend to be fairly responsive in videos if I get it. We're just not getting a lot of traction just yet. This channel has been an on again, off again project for me. I just really felt passionate about doing this project, talking about PC components and trying to address people who don't know anything about computers or very little and want to possibly build their own and are afraid of a lot of things. So I hope this is all useful. And yeah, that's pretty much all I've got for you guys for now. Again, any questions, comments, leave them below. I'll have links and everything set up within the description for the boards and stuff we talked about. And yeah, that should be about it, guys. Thanks again for tuning in and listening to me rant about computer parts. Till next time, guys.